most people and packs the chairs, I'm just going to move everything over here and I'm just going to preach over here. So you guys have to do some work. So I think that's what we're going to have to do. I'm joking. I'm not sure if that's how church operates. It's how our church operates. All right, we're going to be in the book of Esther quite a bit. So we were watching the Sound and Spirit version of Esther in honor of our Aunt Esther, who passed away this last week. And it made me look at Esther a lot differently. I preached a sermon on Esther before, and we focused on, the phrase, "for such a time as this." And that's a great phrase. It's one of my favorite phrases in the Bible. But I want to look at Esther a little differently this morning. But before we open up to Esther, I want you to meet a man who's pivotal to the book of Esther. And I think understanding this man will open our eyes to what Esther may have been having to put her foot in, too. I don't think you are going to feel how brave Esther was or understand the shadows that she was living in until we can understand this man who was sitting on the throne. So just 2 minutes of history, and I have to do this because I'm a history major and I love history. So just bear with me for a few minutes of history. This man's name was Xerxes. In the Bible, they call him Ahasuerus. Same man. He was the most powerful human being alive. I want you to think about this. 126 or 127 provinces all over. From India to Ethiopia. This was an empire so big that the historians tell us that the sun never set upon it. He lifted a finger and armies marched. He said a word and people died, just the way it was. But power can't keep a man from being hurt. And this king had just been humiliated in his own house. This king had decided that he was going to throw a party. And I mean a big party. So governors from all of the provinces, and when you have 127 of them, that's a lot of governors, and their wives and their courtiers and their families. Anybody who was anybody descended on Persia to have a party. And it was in the garden that his father had created. The Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Okay, so you get the backdrop. This was a huge party. Anybody could do pretty much anything they wanted to do. In fact, the Bible makes it clear that the king didn't force them to drink. He had drink for them, but he didn't force it to them. Every man did what he wanted. And the queen, Vashti, had her own party for the ladies. And you guys know the story. The king decides that he wants to show off his favorite queen. And this queen, not only was she chosen to be queen by this Persian emperor, but she was nobility in her own right. This wasn't some gutter person that was brought up to be queen. She was a high-ranking noble lady of her own right. And proud of it. And so she tells the king no, flat no, in front of a hall full of drunk officials, in front of the most powerful man on the face of the planet. She says no. And so this man, embarrassed by his own wife in his own palace, festers with humiliation, anger, betrayal, hurt. So what does a proud man do with his shame? He goes looking for something or somebody to conquer. Xerxes raised the biggest army of the ancient world. The biggest army the ancient world had ever seen. In fact, Herodotus says that there was over, I think, 2 to 3 million soldiers. Most current scholars think that's just impossible. But other Greek historians of that day said it was more like 1 million people in this army. Again, current scholars believe the number is probably closer to between 133,000 to 300,000 soldiers. That's still a massive amount of troops, isn't it? Can you imagine that many men? And so guess who they decide to march on? Somebody should know this. Movies have been made about this. Movies that include 300 men. Which one? Sparta. There we go. So he marches on Greece because he is going to conquer Greece. Because at this time, Greece couldn't be united. They would fight against themselves. Athens and Sparta constantly going head to head. Who was the strongest? Who was the biggest? Who was the mightiest? And so King Xerxes says, you know what? I'm going to go conquer Greece. And so he takes the largest army at the time that the world had ever seen, and he crosses the ocean and he invades Greece. And immediately his 150 to 300,000 men are met by 300. And this humiliated king is humiliated once more. Was he defeated? No. No. But at the Battle of Thermopylae, which took place in 3 days of battle, 3 days it took to finally get his 300,000 men past those 300. By the end of those 3 days, more Greeks had come, and there was about, 20-some thousand, maybe 30-some thousand Greeks that had arrived. So it ended up going from 300 to about 30,000. All told, the Greeks lost about 11,000 men. But they stopped the Greeks, 300,000. And Xerxes, about the same time that he's getting toasted by the Greeks, his fleet, his navy, the same day gets shattered at the sea. Largest navy the world had ever seen, going up against the Greek navy, gets shattered. Humiliated on land, humiliated in the court, humiliated on the water. And when he finally gets to Athens, he is so overcome with humiliation and anger that, you know what he does to Athens? He burns it to the ground. He destroys it. He razes it out of pure spite, because he felt he should be able to just roll right over the Greeks. 300,000 men, he should just be able to roll right over. He so mad, so angry, something had to burn. But then he got scared. After the anger calmed down, he got scared and he became afraid. History tells us he was afraid he was going to be trapped in Greece, because every inch of land that he took, he had to pay in blood with thousands of men, and his army was literally being decimated by a few. And so he was afraid that he was going to be trapped because, again, he just lost this huge naval battle. Ships scattered. He thought he was going to be trapped in Greece. So he razes Athens to the ground, turns around, and drags himself back home to Persia in disgrace, taking his rage out on his generals along the way. History tells us only one general out of all of the generals of his army made it home alive. He had all the others beheaded. Only his lead general made it home. That's how mad this king was. Think about that. Had his own generals killed. Now catch this. The Bible says Esther, if you take a look at the book of Esther, the Bible says Esther was taken into that palace in the 7th year of his reign. Do the math. That's the year Xerxes came limping home from Greece, beaten, broken, boiling mad. Put those words up over the throne of Persia. Humiliated, betrayed, hurt, anger. That's the man. a young Jewish orphan girl is about to be handed to in marriage. Put things in perspective. That's the throne room that she's going to walk into one day, uninvited, with her life in her hands, with the life of an entire nation in her hands. But nobody in that palace could see what I'm about to show you this morning, that behind that throne, back in the dark, there was another throne and somebody was sitting on it. And I want to get into that. I want to talk to you this morning about the King of the shadows. I like to talk about the King of the light. God is God of light, yeah. But we need to remember He's still King of the shadows. Here's something that most folks read right past. 10 chapters of Esther, 10 of them, and God's name never shows up. Not once. Go look at it. Not once do you see the name of God mentioned in the book of Esther. Not once. No burning bush, no parting sea, no voice out of heaven. Read it like Exodus. Try hunting for the miracle and you'll wonder where God went. But the whole point is that God is not missing from Esther. He's hidden. He's not on the stage. He's behind the curtain. He's not in the spotlight. He's in the shadows. He's back there in the dark with nobody clapping, nobody watching. He's running every last thing. He's moving every piece of the board. When nobody will say His name, He is still moving. God has never once lost a game in the dark. And I don't know what shadows you might have carried with you into this building this morning. But I know this. Somebody in this room, you are in a spot of darkness that you can't handle. You might be in over your head. You've done the math, and the math just doesn't math right. You've looked at your life this week, and you think, man, life is impossible. Worry, fear. They didn't just come for a visit. They've taken up root in your life. They're sitting on a throne that only God should sit in. They're at the kitchen table. They're eating your peace. They're eating your joy before your feet ever hit the floor in the morning. And that's no accident, friends. You've got an enemy. You have an enemy. And that is his whole game. That is his whole purpose. How many of you know who C.S. Lewis is? One of my favorite authors who wrote what set of books? The Chronicles of Narnia. But one of the books that he wrote that most people have never read is a book called The Screwtape Letters. And then the Screwtape Letters, it's about a senior devil named Screwtape writing letter after letter to his nephew, a young tempter by the name of Wormwood, and he's teaching this boy how to bring one man down. And over and over and over again, one of Screwtape's favorite weapons is worry. And when I look at this, I think this is an allegory. This is Satan talking to his son almost, saying, hey, how do I bring these people over to my side? And this eager young nephew is coming up with idea after idea after idea. I mean, young Wormwood is fired up. He says, let's just get him with pride, Uncle. We'll puff him up until he bursts. And old Screwtape just shakes his head. And then young Wormwood said, well, what about greed? Avarice will make him chase money his whole life. And Screwtape shakes his head again. Well, lust then, anger, the big loud sins. And the old devil finally says, no, nephew, those only ever catch a few of them. I want all of them. And Wormwood leans in. Then how, Uncle? And Screwtape leans back and he says one word, worry. We'll get them with worry. Get them so scared of tomorrow that he just leans in and he asks you, what about tomorrow? What about the money? What about the test results? What about the kids? What about the grandkids? Until you are so busy being afraid of a future that hasn't even happened that you forget all about the God that is standing there right in front of you. But here, church, is what the devil never counts on. Hidden is not gone. The same God who was hidden in the book of Esther is hidden in your mess this morning. He's hidden in your shadows this morning, and he is working. This morning for class, we had three very good verses, and one of the things that this sermon doesn't do a very good job of is saying, all right, how do you not worry? Okay, this sermon is very good at saying don't worry. Okay, but I don't do a very good job of telling you, well, how don't you worry? Well, if you were in class this morning, there were three very good verses that tell us, what we can do to not worry. All right, and one of them is just rejoice. Period. Psalms 119, verse 24 was the first verse that Gary shared with us this morning. This is the day that who made? God. Rejoice in it. God made it. Satan might put shadows in it. Satan might put obstacles in it. But God made the day. Rejoice in it. Because God is going to take those obstacles and he's going to turn them into rainbows. Good ones, not liberal ones. This isn't something nice to stitch on a pillow. This is a blood-bought redemptive promise made to you. Romans 8:28 says, for we know that all things, not some things, not little things, not only Mondays and Tuesdays, but all things work together for good to them that love God and who are called according to his purpose. All things. Not the good things, not the easy things, all things. That means the diagnoses, the layoffs, the empty chair at the table, the shadows you can't see the end of. He's weaving every last piece of it together for your good. And sometimes we can't see past the shadows. But he's working in those shadows for our good. Nowhere in this book do you see a clearer version than in a Persian palace, in an orphan girl, in 10 chapters where God is never named. Nowhere do we see this clear, this version of God operating in the darkness. Esther 4:14. Again, like I said, it was my favorite verse in Esther. But who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Look at Esther and count the shadows on this girl. She's a Jew. That's one shadow. But she's not home. She's in exile in a pagan empire that conquered her people. That's shadow one. And she's an orphan. Mom and dad are gone. She was raised by her cousin Mordecai. That means no parents, no inheritance, no standing. She is a nobody. That is shadow number 2. And then she's going to go into a court with a king that's been humiliated, betrayed, and hurt, and he is extremely angry. So angry that he killed many people. So angry that he pretty much told his queen, you're going to go live out your days somewhere on the edge of the world and never be seen again. That's shadow number 3. Shadow number 4 is there's this evil person that is seeking to kill her entire people. Shadow number 4. You sit down to write a story of who saves a nation and you skip right over this girl. But that is exactly the kind of person the King of Shadows uses. He doesn't want your resume. He's not impressed by your family name or your bank account. Orphans, shepherd boys like David, fishermen, tax collectors. He drops them right into the middle of the story because it's never about being qualified. It's about being available. Now watch the king in the book of Esther go to work in the darkness. Remember, Vashti got thrown out. And there's this opening on the throne of the world. And they search the whole kingdom for a new queen. And out of all of them, the king picks Esther. Chapter 2 says he sets the royal crown upon her head and he makes her queen. Before there's any crisis, before there's Haman, before the death decree, God has already slipped this little girl into position for such a time that's coming. The queen is crowned before the enemy ever draws his sword. A wounded queen, a wounded king, a beauty queen contest in a pagan palace. None of it looked like God. None of it. But all of it was God. Working in the dark, setting up the rescue before his people even needed one, before they even knew they needed one. That's your king. That's your friend. Before you even know you need rescuing, he is working to put something in place or someone in place to provide the rescue that you need for that moment he knows is coming. Don't worry about tomorrow because he knows what's going to happen tomorrow. He knows what's going to happen 5 years from tomorrow, and he's preparing for it in the darkness because he knows that's where Satan is attacking, is in the darkness. So that's where he is, defending, protecting. He gets the deliverance ready before you even need it. He plants the seeds years before the harvest. He puts you in a certain room, a certain job, a certain city, long before you even understand why. And he didn't start last week. He started before your very first breath, which is why the sanctity of life is so important. And anybody who destroys the unborn is destroying the very purpose of God, the very design of God. Psalms 139, in your book all my members were written, when as yet there were none of them. Before you had a face, God saw you. Before you had a name, he knew you. He told Jeremiah the very same thing. He says, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. So hear me, you are not an accident. You're not. You are not a coincidence. You are not a random pile of cells that just showed up here one day. You were born with a purpose. You were seen. You were known. You were planned by name before time itself. And the same God who slipped Esther into the palace has slipped you into the spot that you are in today, this year, this town, this family, this life. You didn't just happen. You were sent. And that is the second biggest thing I need you to carry out of here today. Where you are standing isn't an accident of geography. It's an appointment of grace. But every story's got a villain, and this one's name is Haman. And you watch him. He does exactly what you think enemies are supposed to do. Haman is the king's right-hand man, and he was actually brought in to save Persia because guess what? Guess what, guys? This is something I wish our politicians knew, is that when you try to do something in the government, it costs money. And a lot of it. Raising 300,000+ troops costs money. A lot of it. And Persia was hemorrhaging money. So they bring in Haman, who's the most successful governor in all the provinces, to help. Haman is the man that helped Xerxes' father. So they bring in Haman to help right the ship. And he becomes the king's right-hand man. He's proud and he's cruel and he's promoted over everybody. The king says bow and everybody bows, but Mordecai won't bow. He's a Jew and the only person he's ever going to bow to is God. And so Haman's pride goes rotten. One man isn't enough. He decides, you know what? I'm going to go after every Jew. And so he rolls the dice, which is called the pur. And he picks a day. And he gets the king's ring, and he signs it into law. Every Jew, young, old, woman, little kids, all of them marked for death. Can you feel how dark it just got? God's people go to bed fine and wake up with a death sentence. This isn't just 7, 10, 15 generals now. This is an entire nation about ready to be slaughtered. That's the enemy's go-to move. And it hasn't changed today. He's an obstacle builder. That's who Satan is. Bad news on top of bad news, a diagnosis, then a bill, then a phone call. He stacks it higher and higher and higher, whispering the whole time, see, it's hopeless. Where's your God now? Just give up. He's not coming. But here's what Haman didn't know. Here's what the enemy never counts on. Every single obstacle that Haman was busy building, the King of Shadows was already turning it into his setup for rescue. Haman thought he was writing a death warrant. What he was doing was signing his own. You cannot out-scheme the God who works in the dark. Mordecai hears the decree. He tears his clothes. He gets word to Esther inside the palace, and now we're at the heart of the book. And Esther is so scared, and who wouldn't be? She walks into the king's court uninvited, and when you do so, this was the law of the land. You walk into the king's court uninvited, you die. Unless by some tempt of fate, the king holds out the scepter. And then guess what? You get to breathe for a little bit longer, unless you say the wrong thing. And then you die. This is the man. First of all, Esther hadn't been called on in a month. Okay? So maybe she's feeling like the king's forgotten her. And then don't forget about who's on the throne. This is the man who burnt Athens over hurt feelings. I mean, this is a man who's a walking powder keg. Worry and fear are moving in on her, trying to rent her headspace. And Mordecai sends back words to her that changes everything. In Esther 4:13 and 14. Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, Think not with thyself that you shall escape in the king's house more than all of the Jews. For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then there will be an enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will be destroyed. And who knows whether or not you are put here in this kingdom for such a time as this. All those years that Esther couldn't see what God was up to, he was doing this. The orphan childhood for this. The favor with the king for this. That crown on her head for this. The king of the shadows had lined up every single chess piece for one moment. This moment, right here. She didn't end up on that throne with luck. She was put there by God for this reason, for this purpose. You too have been put in this kingdom for such a time as this. And catch the truth that was tucked into that message sent to Esther. Deliverance will arise from another place. God's plan will not fail. He will save his people, with Esther or without her. The King of Shadows never loses, but getting to be part of what he's doing, that depends on whether or not Esther trusts him enough to step out of the shadows and into the spotlight. God doesn't need you. He doesn't need you. He chooses you. He chooses to use you. And that is grace. That's grace. The tragedy is never that God's plan falls apart. It won't. The tragedy is that you and I sometimes miss our part because we let worry and fear talk us out of it. Now watch this scared orphan girl become a hero. She doesn't run. She doesn't make excuses. She counts the cost, the whole deadly cost, and she picks obedience over playing it safe. Chapter 4, verse 16 says, So I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. The fear doesn't vanish. It doesn't go away. I guarantee you this little orphan girl goes into that throne room. I guarantee you she's probably shaking like a leaf. And she's walking towards the most dangerous man alive, but faith stands her up taller than the fear. And she says, I would rather trust God I can't see than be ruled by fear I can feel. And look how she gets ready. 3 days of fasting and prayer before she takes a single step. She doesn't charge in on her own strength. She goes and she finds the King of Shadows first, and that is the answer to living worry-free. Go find the King of Shadows. Take your worries and your fears to the King of Shadows. Let him deal with it. Take your worry, take your fear to the shadow of the cross. Leave it there. And you know how it ends. She walks in, the scepter goes out, and she lives. 2 carefully planned dinners, and Haman's whole scheme spills out in front of the king. And that gallows that Haman built to hang Mordecai are the exact gallows that he swings upon himself. The death sentence gets answered with a rescue. God's people are saved, and to this day they keep the Feast of Purim, remembering God who was never named and never once left the room. So I want to bring this home before we leave this morning, because this isn't just an old story from a faraway place. This is your story. This is my story. You may never stand in front of the king. We may never stand in front of a king. We may never stand in front of President Trump. We may never stand in front of any, insanely powerful, dangerous person. But the same King of Shadows who worked in Esther is at work in you this morning, right now. And the very thing that has you worried sick. Whatever it is that you're going through, whatever obstacles have been planted in your path by the Prince of Darkness, the King of Shadows is working to use to your benefit, for your rescue. So what do you do with the worry and fear that have been living rent-free? You do what Esther did. You take them to the king. Peter says it plain, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Cast it, throw it out, hand it over to the one who's been on the throne behind the curtain the whole time. You are not the king of your situation, and thank God for that, because you can never carry it. You can never carry the burdens. You can never carry the obstacles. You can never live in the shadow like that. But he can, and he is. The God of Esther is hidden, but he's never, never gone. He is the King of Shadows, and he's never once lost control of the dark. We may not be able to see him with our eyes. We don't hear him out loud. But this is why the Bible says we're supposed to walk by faith, not by sight. And when the shadows get long and heaven goes quiet and the enemy leans in and whispers that you're all alone, and you look back behind you and you can only see one set of footprints